Hi everyone, welcome to our no-till farming field day. We're here at Local Harvest. My name is Emily and this field day is hosted by Farm Folk City Folk. I just want to begin by honoring and respectfully acknowledging that we are in the ancestral territories of the Stolo First Nation. We're here today with Dan, who's going to talk to us all about his no-till farming operation. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, so I'm Dan Oostenbrink and I've farmed on this land for about 9 years together with my family and a bunch of employees. We're doing about 26 acres right now of no-till. It's a pretty big endeavor, but we've discovered that no-till farming is what works best for us, and we've explored different avenues throughout the years and we've had varying successes with no-till, but basically have found that no-till is probably the future of agriculture on our farm, and other people are picking up on that. And so we have a variety of different vegetables and fruits that we grow on the farm, and nuts. We have a bunch of animals on the farm as well. And yeah, so we're going to take you around today on a whirlwind tour of our farm, talk about transitioning from pasture land or a weedy area into no-till food production system, and we're going to then take you around and see some of the crops that have been really successful for us. And I also want to show you how we do our transplants now, how we've kind of changed from our original setup with doing transplants.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. I hope you enjoy the video.
Thank you. Our farming system is based on the whole concept of biomimicry, learning from nature what works well and applying those concepts to our farming situation. And so when you walk in the forest in an undisturbed ecosystem, maybe even the prairies, along the coast where the tide comes in and brings lots of debris from the sea, you're going to notice some consistent themes. And the first thing you're going to notice is that we have generally very undisturbed soil situations, unless we have catastrophic events such as volcanoes and earthquakes and mudslides and avalanches or whatever else we have. Undisturbed soil, so minimal soil disturbance. The only soil disturbance that we're going to find is what the organisms in the area are causing to our particular area. The second thing you're going to notice is that the ground is generally covered by living plants. And that's one thing that should become law on your farm or in your garden. Your surface of your ground should be covered by living plants at all times, in as much as that's possible. It becomes challenging the bigger you get, because the bigger you get, the more land you have to maintain. You're probably going to need more equipment, and so when I say cover the ground with living plants at all times, you can see I have an empty bed here. I have violated a very important law. Now it's going to be planted up again, but still there's a lag time. Now if I had less land and I was doing this in my home garden, maybe I shouldn't say less land, I should say maybe the right number of people per acre. And if we had more people per acre, then this crop, or say this cauliflower that's going to be coming out, could already be planted or interplanted with the next crop. And maybe that's pushing bean seeds in between, so that when we do harvest the cauliflower, we can right away have a new crop that's growing in the same area. But if we're trying to do things really efficiently, sometimes we need to cut some corners, and that's what we're doing on the farm. So I'm going to show you after I'm going to take out a bed of cauliflower, and until the new crop comes in, it's going to be vacant. So in as much as possible, you want to make sure that you're covering the ground with living plants at all times. The third thing that you're going to notice in all undisturbed ecosystems is that the ground is covered with decaying plant material at all times. So some sort of decaying material, whether that's in the forest and you see leaves falling down and twigs and the dead skunk that dies, whatever else you have, the ground is strewn with decaying material. And what you're going to notice about that material that's laying on the ground in all these different environments is that it's not of one type of consistency. It's very diverse, the material that would be strewn on the ground. As forest is a classic example of that, where you have bigger twigs and finer leaves and all kinds of other things, pine needles, and we have diversity of material on the ground. Fourthly, we're going to notice that all these undisturbed ecosystems have a vast variety of different types of plants growing. So we have incredible biodiversity in all these systems. So really 4 major tenets. Not only do we have biodiversity of plants, we also have biodiversity of animals, from the microscopic, and then we have a variety of different kingdoms represented. All the kingdoms should be represented, right? So we have a lot of fungi, we have the bacteria, we have amoeba, protozoa, all the way up as we go larger and larger to the small mammals and the small snakes, amphibians, and then larger animals as well. And the larger animals sometimes present some challenges for farms, right? So does this mean that you have to have pigs on your farm, you have to have cows, you have to, if we're to kind of keep with what happens in nature, then possibly, okay? But those sometimes become challenges for us. So keeping that in mind, those 4 basic rules, we are not allowed to break those. And probably of all of these 4 basic rules, the most important one to maintain, in my opinion, is minimal soil disturbance. Sometimes we, through either ignorance or defiance or whatever else, we want to move back to tillage. I don't know why we always want to till the ground. Why is that so common amongst farmers and home gardeners? Always a desire to disturb. It makes us perhaps feel in control. It makes us, give us that feeling that we're subduing, or we're influencing our will on the land. But we have found that anytime we move away and step back towards tillage of any type, we're always disappointed. It may solve a temporary problem, such as, the weeds took over, or you have a stubborn crop that you can't kill and you like to get the new crop in, and out comes the tiller. So those are always challenges that we have, but we find that when we go back to tillage, we're always somehow disappointed. Either the weeds take over the next time and we're in a worse situation than we were before, the soil becomes soggy and saturated, you lose your porosity, you chase away the important organisms in the soil, and things just don't perform like they could if you were not tilling. And so we've really tried to maintain a no-till aspect. But I will show and point out some areas of the farm that we have been tilling. Not tilling, we've been using a power harrow to deal with problems. And I'll talk about that as we go, because I want to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So we'll make sure I touch on that and show you, the impact of that, or how you can perhaps do soil disturbance with as minimal impact as possible. Okay, so if you're starting off with really weedy pasture land, or maybe you are currently doing no-till, but you're tillage and you have a lot of weeds, how do you move away from that towards a no-till system? We formerly, and up till a couple of years ago, have been employing a pretty aggressive approach to converting from pasture, because that's what this land was before, a dairy farm, or animal pasture, to no-till system. And we have used a tiller in order to take us on that journey, or a power harrow. Actually, I like the power harrow a lot better. Tillers move in this fashion, power harrows move around like this. And so your disturbance is usually much more, less aggressive. And so we use a power harrow over top. We take the power harrow right over top of a pasture land, and we just hit it right through the summer months every week or every other week. And the intention is to try to kill as many of the perennial weeds as possible. The perennial weeds is what really worries me. It's the quackgrass or crabgrass that's particularly problematic. Morning glory, Japanese knotweed, blackberries can sometimes be quite pernicious. Horsetail, dandelion not too severe, but buttercup, yeah, kind of a big problem. So what we do is we just go over in the summer months, nowhere in the spring or in the fall, because we just get too much rain, and definitely not in the winter, throughout the summer. So starting in the month of June, we will go over this plot of land every week or every other week, depending on the weather. If we see a sunny period coming up, then we will till just before that sunny period. So like today would be an excellent day to get in there. The soil's soft and moist, we till, and then comes the baking sun. And the sun burns up a lot of these weeds, but because they're perennial and many deep rooting and stubborn, they're gonna pop out of the ground within a few days actually. And then we hit them again, and we hit them again. And we go through the entire season of tillage. It is the most destructive thing you can do for soil. But what we have discovered, it is the easiest way to go from no-till or pasture into no-till, other than using a herbicide, which is, I hope in your case, an absolute no-no. And that's, we haven't stepped there at all. So this is, although the critical person coming forward could say, well, maybe the herbicide is less aggressive than your repeated tillage. I don't know. I think tillage is less problematic because you're leaving less residual problems for long term. And you'd be surprised that if you go through this process, and again, we're talking in this region. I don't think you could do this in Alberta, where they get these whipping winds coming through in the summer and probably going to take all their land away, right? Where we have, repeating what we had in the Dust Bowl. It works in this area. Once we go through to the end of the summer, we have never had any weed, perennial weed, that can survive that. Now what you're also doing is you're reducing the weed seed bank. So you're tilling, rain lands on the land, you get rapid germination of your annual weeds. So what do we have? Lamb's quarter, red root pigweed, chickweed, a whole host of other annual weeds. Your weed seed population goes down by repeated tillage, and that's also what you want to try to encourage. Now what we've done in the past is, after we've gone through that process, we've gone down with 6 inches up to a foot of organic matter. So like you see these big piles here, we'd layer that on the field. Now you discover very, very quickly that that is a gigantic task of putting down a foot of compost on the land. It's a big job, you need big equipment, and worse off, it's extraordinarily costly. And so I've now moved away from that approach towards a minimal amount of compost, because you don't need that kind of organic matter in order to improve soil conditions. You actually need very little to improve soil conditions for the subsequent crop that you're going to be putting in. So we have now moved to more like 1 inch of compost. And the intention for us has been not so much improving fertility, although that is a big part of it, but to provide a weed barrier for the crop that's going in. This brings us up to the fall. Now you'll notice that what I'm talking about here is kind of a 1 year thing before you can actually start producing food. And I'll talk about how you can get started immediately, but there's obviously going to be challenges with that. So 1 year to get started. By the time you arrive into the fall is a time to start planting your cover crops. And the recommendation for cover crops are cover crops that are deep rooting, but also produce a lot of growth. You want a lot of green material, you want a lot of carbon, especially if compost for you is prohibitively expensive or maybe not accessible. So you want a lot of green material. Now, what types of crops answer this requirement? I have found that mostly you're restricted to the cereal type crops, so the grains. That means you're looking at rye, oats, barley, not so much buckwheat because it grows really fast, although I do like it. Maybe you can get buckwheat in and then mow it down and get another crop in before winter. But either way, by the time winter comes, which for us, I would say that's kind of like October. And the reason I say October is that's kind of the last time you can get into your field without messing things up. By October, and plus you want a good amount of growth as we head into winter, you want your ground covered with not just one type of crop, as we talk about biodiversity, mixing seed, and I wouldn't go with 5 or 10, I would probably stick with 2 or 3. And so that means you might want to include a flower in that. So Lacy Phacelia for me has been just a tremendously great flower. That's Phacelia with Phacelia. Phacelia, really great. Alyssum, white alyssum, although it's fairly, it doesn't grow that tall, but they're easy to kill. They're self-seeders, but I don't see that as being necessarily an issue. And then some type of grain, so oats or barley or wheat or something like that. Mix the seed, and however you do this, I would recommend that at that stage you form your beds. So you plant your crops in the beds, the permanent beds, because now you're permaculture, that you are going to be growing in. So your pathways, you could either, use wood chips in there or nothing. We don't give any special treatment to pathways. They're just driven on. We don't actually drop down a different material. You see some market gardeners are doing that, and I think it's spectacular. We're just too big to, that just doesn't make sense. I'd need a machine that could actually drop that, or a wheelbarrow, and it would be, exhaustive work. And I don't mind hard work, but I don't really see any huge benefit to doing that. Okay, so you form your beds, and then you plant in your beds however you would intend to plant later on for your whatever you're going to be growing. If it's spinach that's going in the next year, or whether you're planting maybe carrots or whatever you're doing, think about your bed size and your spacing, and some of the great resources for that. John Martin Fortier, you probably heard of him, and other farmers like Elliot Coleman, and these are probably household names for you, or maybe not, but they will be at one point in time, I can assure you of that. Curtis Stone is another one, and we'll share these resources at the end. You'll have access to that. But these are some of the people you want to have access to, because they have perfected the system. No-till growers, I think they're in North Carolina. Josh Satin Hill Farms is another one that comes to mind. And the person he works with as well, I forget his name. There's so much content available to you on how to set up your beds for your situation. And they are mostly looking at 1 to 2 acres and less. And we're doing things on a little larger scale. So our bed system that we set up right from the beginning is there's 5 feet in between. Basically, center of tire to center of tire is 5 feet. And we work within that 5 feet on usually about a 30-inch bed. So the actual growing space within the bed is 30 inches. And that allows us to plant 4 rows of carrots in that bed. And the rows are about 10 inches apart, which brings us to 30 inches. So that's our system, and that works for us. But I recommend you look at what some of these other people are doing to make sure that the system works for you. But whatever you do, whatever system you move to, is be consistent right across your entire farm. Don't work with a 30-inch bed on one part of your farm or garden and a 25-inch bed somewhere else. I would highly discourage you from doing that. Even if some crops may it might be a better idea to do that because certain types of crops might be better off, say, on a narrower bed or perhaps a wider bed. But we have avoided that. I'll give an example. Potatoes. I find that we plant one row of potatoes down a row. We'll take a look at my potatoes later. You have potatoes right down the row, and 5 feet away you get another row of potatoes. I find that distance is too great. I would prefer to see maybe 4 feet in between, 48 inches. That would probably maximize our potato production. But as soon as I do that, I'm restricted to where my potatoes grow on my farm. In other words, potatoes have to grow in the same area every year because I like to work with permaculture. If I am compacting my driveway here with my tractor tires, and next year I'm going to change from a 5-foot spacing between tractor tires to a 3-foot, that's clumsy. Moreover, I would need different tractors or different implements for a different bed size. So we just stick with one bed size right across the entire farm, and we work our plants within that system. So you've now established your beds. You got 1 inch of compost. If you have more, I don't actually see a huge benefit in putting 6 to 8 inches on. If I could start 10 years ago where I was, I wouldn't have gone with that amount, because what I'm finding is when I'm putting this huge fluffy layer on the surface is the biological activity in that compost, whatever it is just not where I need it to be. Like the soil food web hasn't developed in the soil. And what we're discovering is that we get all kinds of funky stuff happening. You know, weird mushrooms popping up all over. The fungi population balloons, which isn't a problem, but sometimes that can be a challenge for growing certain types of crops. So I would rather go with 1 inch of compost, maybe 2 inches of compost. In fact, if you do have the resources available, what you might want to do is put 1 inch on the surface of good, well-rotted compost. You're still tilling, you're still at the tillage stage, work it in first, and then on top of that, cover with 1 inch of compost. Now you've incorporated some of that organic matter. Notice that I used to be a strict no-tiller. Like, this would have been hypocrisy, what I'm telling you right now. But I've kind of like realized that to get into the no-till system maybe is going to require some intervention that just defies what I've been trying to preach all along. And in fact, I'm kind of at that stage right now. So use that tiller, and then after that point, tiller's off the farm, or the power harrow, or whatever else. 1 inch of compost goes on top. And there's one other thing that I should mention, is that perhaps you first, after you've incorporated that organic matter and you haven't put that 1 inch layer on top, is you're first planting next year's crop, and then you provide that layer of mulch. So I'm thinking about garlic. Okay, so garlic is a highly profitable crop, and if you do it as no-till, you've reduced your workload, and you're going to realize a good result the following year in July, which allows you to get another crop in after July before the winter cold comes. And we'll talk about overwintering as well. So I'm thinking now you're putting that garlic into this tilled up area, you've incorporated some organic matter, you push the garlic cloves in whatever spacing you decide, whatever bed spacing you decide, and now you cover up with 1 inch of compost. Or maybe it's peas or fava beans that you choose to use as a cover crop. I like those in particular because they're so easy to kill the following year. Whereas some of the cereals are brutal. Like, they're going to produce a lot, give you a lot of challenges. So if you use, say, fava beans, that's a big seed, or peas, you seed them first using simple earthway seeder or a jang seeder or whatever these market gardeners are using. You seed them in, then you cover up with 1 inch of compost. And then the following year, you mow them down somehow. I'm using a flail mower. Maybe you don't have access to a flail mower, but either way, and maybe your crop is going to be winter killed. Some years peas and fava beans will survive the winter, but they're so easy to get rid of the following year that it shouldn't be a problem. Going in with a grain crop, if you use grains as your cover crop, you're going to discover that in order to kill, if we pick rye, for example, one of the harder ones to kill, the way to kill rye the following year is to wait till it starts to produce a seed, and then to kill it when it's still at its milky stage. So you grab a couple of the kernels that kind of developed, you squeeze them between your finger and you get a bit of white stuff that oozes out. That is the time to kill it. So you mow it down at that stage, or you crimp it. There's a lot of guys going into crimping now. Frith Farms, one of my favorite farms in the US. It's an amazing job. But they flatten and then they grow right into that new crop. But you got to remember, you're not going to be growing the following year until about late June before you can start to grow your new crops, unless you can find another way to kill those winter crops. If you want to get started earlier, you're going to have to look for an easy to kill crop that you can remove without pulling the roots out. Roots stay in the ground unless it's obviously you're after the root to harvest and eat. Okay, and then there's other types of cover crops like tillage radishes are pretty awesome. I just find that they're not as deep rooting as they're made out to be. What I find is they kind of grow above the ground. When it's really hard to penetrate, most of the tillage radish is above the ground. But they're very easy to kill and you can harvest them and eat them. So cover crops that are edible, then you get double benefit. Okay, but stay away from wimpy annual crops. You want something that will be able to survive into the cold. Beets might be another option. So, think of a red beet as a cover crop. They're not particularly deep rooting, but what I've found is they actually survive the winter quite well. You can harvest them, their greens the following spring. You can harvest all the way up until about March. And after that, they want to grow again because they're biannual. They want to produce their seed the following year. You can take them out when they want. And if they do die off, what I have found that beet, that sweet beet that's in the ground, in this next year's spring, if it's dead, you pull it out and it's like we have found like handfuls of red wrigglers underneath a single beet. And so there's huge benefit in that as well. So there, you got a bunch of options available to you, but either way, we're going into the winter with something covering the ground, a living plant and a decomposing plant. The microbial life associated with living plants is like 1,000 or 2,000 times greater than what it is without a living plant. So you must put a living plant of some type in the ground going into winter. That is law. Yes?
Just talking about the difference between idealism and in practice, but the ideal of having something planted at all times. I love the idea of crimping, but I haven't seen anyone doing it without like 2 to 6 weeks of tarping, depending on the season. Do you think that's worth it just to avoid mowing, or?
So the question is, crimping is a great idea. So what we're doing with crimping is we're basically flattening. You can imagine a tall stand of, say, wheat. We're flattening it and we're coming over with something that kind of not chops up the stem, but bends the stem in multiple places on the plant. You lay it down, and typically what most farms are doing is they're covering after that with a tarp in order to kill it off, because even at that stage, some of the plant wants to grow. Unless you time it perfectly, you're going to have some challenges. So the question is, do we tarp after that? Now we're getting quite late in the year, and so the challenge with getting a new crop in before winter is huge. And I know we have an extended growing season here near the coast, but I think that's going to present some huge challenges. And so rather than going that route, unless you have a lot of land available and you can afford to have no production in that area, then that might be an option. Short of that, we might have to move towards an easy to kill winter cover. Yeah, there are the ideal, then what's practical for us, and we have to strike a balance there. Okay, so once you're established in this no-till, I wouldn't say established, once you've gotten started, because you're going to run into some problems, is you need to have the mindset that every single weed that develops on your plot of land is immediately removed. And that requires, for sure, weekly walkthrough of your entire patch. If you do have some perennial weeds that push through, you get the spade, you dig it out, and you remulch in that particular area, because that disturbance is just going to bring up new weed seeds. And you cannot, definitely no holidays during the summer and spring and fall. Your holiday is winter time. We've discovered that on the farm. And some of the guys here taking holidays in the summer is not at all acceptable. But yeah, they've got families and other commitments, so there's a balance there as well. But you must destroy all weeds that are growing. And one thing you're going to notice on the farm here is all our pathways are bare. We don't use grass, although I think that would be a better thing to have, because again, you're sequestering carbon, you're holding soil together. We have gone with a bare pathway. Someday we may move to grass or some other type of pathway here, but for now this is what we need to do. All the way around the property, and you'll see that we maintain weed-free boundaries and borders. You'll notice around our greenhouses, no weeds. Did we have weeds? Yes. How did we remove them? With a spade or a shovel. Was it hard work? Yes. Very hard work. But I don't see an alternative. I've visited other farms and consulted at other farms, and they say, well, how, they visit us and say, how do you do this? There's no weeds. Hard work, sweat, blood, and tears, and there's no substitute. I don't know of one. Maybe you could come forward and share one with me, but there's no way that you can deal with weeds other than through hard work. And once you have it established, you're fine. You'll be okay. Okay? These guys are going to come here and they want to pick some brassicas. So if we, let's move over this way a little bit. And let's actually get down in these beds so we can see what's happening. This was our first planting of brassicas. We go by weeks. This is telling me, well, what do we have here? Week 15, the 15th week of the year, these brassicas were planted. Okay, this 5-bed section, we work in units. We see each bed as a unit, and then a 5-bed section as another bigger unit. So we chunk things and put them in compartments, because you want to build that efficiency. Then the next section over was probably a week 17. And then week 18, and we keep going with brassicas. I think we have a total of 13 sections of brassicas. Finally, this one is being harvested. And the one beside us is starting to get harvested, and then now we're into our product. We're late this year. It was a very cool spring, but it's happening. And so we're doing brassicas all the way down. And so now that we have established the no-till system here and we've dealt with weeds, we're going to start. I'm going to show you the next level, and what this tool here is one of my favorite implements on the farm. It's absolutely amazing. It's a flail mower, and you could take a look underneath later to see the flail's teeth that we use for chopping up existing crops before we transition into a new crop. Now, if you don't have one of these and you're working on smaller scale, you're going to have to find a way to remove these brassicas some way or another, and they're very gnarly, these stems. So you might need a pruners or something like that to be able to cut them out, but essentially that's where you want to take it. What's beautiful about the flail is that it's going to take all this material and it's going to grind it up and make a cauliflower smoothie and strew that on the surface. And that's going to attract a lot of life, which is going to be necessary to, break this down and feed subsequent crops, which is why I like the flail. Now, what I would recommend, the other way to do it obviously is to take this, compost it, then take fresh compost and use that on top of your garden beds. It's a lot more work, and that's why this system here is so effective for us and powerful. Okay, so, and it's just one pass with the flail mower, and that's what's beautiful about it. Yes?
Just before you terminate that, Do you have any metric for kind of labor hours for weeding for like one bed of brassicas from planting to tilling or not tilling?
Yeah, that's a good question. So labor, the whole idea of labor on the farm is our most expensive cost. It's the highest cost of all things we do. I don't remember the exact number, but it's up there in the hundreds of thousands for this farm. Okay, I think I'm saying 500,000 approximately, and we pay our people well. The kids, you got to pay minimum wage. Most of the adults are making 50,000 or more. Okay, so most of the big people on the farm, depending on speed, because speed is the most important thing. So we need people who are fast. So labor is very expensive. What we try to do with the composting and the mulching is we try to front end the cost. So we put the cost in up front. Very effective mulching can reduce our weed pressure significantly, which means that we have less labor cost. And so that the farmers who work here can devote their attention to things other than weeding. Because weeding doesn't really add value to the food. It doesn't make the cauliflower taste better, necessarily. Okay? Unless your weeds are everywhere, and then obviously you need some sunlight on the plants and there's less competition and all the rest. But labor is one of those I would call waste. So if I can reduce the cost of labor on the farm, then it's a win. So what we do is, I don't know if you noticed a bunch of kids there, nieces and nephews and whoever I can get a hold of, to work on the farm. They work 6-hour days, 3 days a week. And I've found that there's not a lot of adults out there nowadays that want to get down on their hands and knees. And these are nieces and nephews in particular. I got a bunch of those. Neighboring kids in the community. We recruit them and we make a pretty big force of them. And so our objective is to get through the farm weeding. So these are 300-foot beds. And we have about 600 of these on the farm. And we get through the entire farm in a week. Last week it took Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the kids also did a bit of picking, but most of their time was devoted to weeding. This week, our hope is to get through Monday and Wednesday, through the whole farm. And the following week, 1 day through the whole farm. And that's every weed, seek and destroy. Per bed, what we've tried to do is 5 minutes per bed. 2.5 minutes out there and 2.5 minutes back. And that's the objective. So that they see the weeds from both angles, coming in here and going back that way.
300-foot beds?
300-foot beds. Okay. No, it wasn't always that way. Our first years when we were doing tillage, 1 bed of carrots would take us sometimes 4 or 5 hours on a single bed. And we have now brought that down to 2.5 minutes with no-till. And if you can, to get to your question, if you can reduce your labor cost on your farm, only then, as far as I can see how this works, will you be able to be profitable. Short of that, unless you have grandma and grandpa and all the other volunteers in your area, you know, friends and whoever else, and you don't have to pay them very much, you'll be able to make it work then as well. But if you want to have workers and you want to pay them a fair wage, then your costs are going to be very high unless you can control weeding. Sorry, your question.
When they pull the weeds, do they just drop them in the bed?
No.
Put them in pails and take them?
Yeah, everything's in buckets. Everything comes out. And a lot of the weeds we could leave behind, but it's too difficult for me to say to the kids, that particular weed was in the bucket, but that one you can leave behind. And so we do train them. And one other thing about work is if you weren't here today, I would be with that weeding crew. I find that is an absolute essential, is that farmer, owner, leader is on the ground with the kids pulling weeds. And you're so much more productive, and you can teach so many skills and you can talk about microbiology in soil. You can talk about photosynthesis. You can talk about so many things that are going to make them better growers themselves and hopefully take their experiences back to their place. And we've found that with Yeah, I'll just leave that for later. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Do they do that by hand or do they have a hoe or something?
Most of the weeding's by hand. Some of it we use a wheel hoe, and I'll demonstrate the wheel hoe in as we go over to the other area. Okay, so I'm getting a little sidetracked. That's why I checked myself. We're talking about transitioning from a very weedy area to no-till, and now I've taken you through the first year. You're getting into your second year. You've maintained a weed-free garden. You took care of your boundaries, and now you have maybe in your second year, maybe it's garlic, in which case you wouldn't need a flail mower because all of the garlic comes out and gets dried. What we have found is that between every crop, before a new crop goes in, there should be some introduction of compost. Every time a crop comes out, better yet, you should introduce compost while the existing crop is growing. I found that to be the best way to introduce compost. But the problem is if you're, say, growing romaine lettuce and you want to put compost around it nicely, and I have, you know, like 1,200 romaines in one bed, and then it's a wheelbarrow job and I'm putting it around. Now, if you have a small garden, I think that's the most powerful way to do that. Following the recommendations of the organic guide with when you can apply compost at what stage is best applied while the plant is actively growing. And I'll give examples of how I do that, and I'm going to show you today how that can be done with a machine. I find that I can do it with the brassicas, and I just top dress right over top of the plants. And some of them don't like that a lot, and they flop over because my composter is not too consistent in how it drops it. But usually I can come behind later and you know, fluff off some of the compost and they're fine. So you're in your second year, and maybe you terminated your cover crop and now you're planting your first crop. Before you do that, compost was introduced. You don't need much, very little. I would recommend that in the first number of years, you reintroduce compost every time a crop comes out. Maybe when you're established and your farm is established, you don't need to do that. Okay, you've got the soil fertility, you've got the microbiology, the soil food web is humming, you're good to go. Now, when you want to terminate a vegetable crop, most vegetable crops are very easy to terminate. Salad mixes are harder because they tend to want to regrow. So arugula, we have a lot of trouble with arugula, we have a lot of trouble with cress, we have a lot of trouble with salad mix, like the mesclun mix. Those ones are presenting a lot of problems for us. So I'll discuss how we've been dealing with that. And but I find these types of crops, brassicas, romaine lettuce, squash, for example, after those will be harvested, piece of cake. One pass with this faithful friend and we're good to go. So I'm going to show you this one right now. I just wanted to go ahead here and make sure that there's nothing left in here, but I don't think there is. At least I can get a little ways. Again, it looks like most of this has been harvested. I see a little baby here. You want a little baby?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we'll, I won't go the whole way. I'll just show you some of this, and it does want to throw stuff out the back, and it does make a lot of racket. So stand off to the sides is fine because it's not going to throw anything that way. And if you did want to have a look underneath, then now's a good time to do that and just see what these, what the components are. And basically it's a drum with these claws, and that drum whirls around at a very high RPM and beats the crop into pulp. And this is one style of flail. There's different teeth that you can attach, but it's a very powerful way. And if you're thinking about smaller scale, the BCS also has a flail mower attachment. They have every attachment you can imagine with the BCS. It's that blue walk behind tractor that a lot of smaller market gardeners use. But this obviously is a little more powerful and is effective. So one or two passes depending on the situation. And I'm going get it back up right to the edge of the bed here. So as you can see, the flail actually reaches down a 1/4 inch into the existing layer. That's why it's actually incorporating some of this into that top little bit. But you see there's nothing, we would plant the same day. So now what we would do is, and we're putting brassicas back in here without hesitation. You know, that whole crop rotation thing is not something we adhere to. I found it not necessary. Next year I might put brassicas here again, but maybe not. I don't even worry. I never worry about crop rotation. It's the last thing on my mind. We will dibble holes. So we have a dibbler, big drum with a bunch of pokes on there that pop holes in the ground, and then we'll come in right behind the dibbler and we'll plant up the bed on the same spacing, and we'll go in with our fall cabbages, which are going to be harvested sometime October, November. We try to push them as late as possible, and then next week that bed's coming out, and then the next week the next bed, and away we go. Okay, so now you're established in no-till. Now I would put on some compost, and I'll just show you that with this machine here. I know one thing that you might be saying is, well, I can't afford the equipment, and there's other factors. I get that all, okay? We have had the luxury of having my wealthy father funding the farm. A lot of people don't have that option. And also his patience in allowing us to get this set up, because we didn't make money the first 7 years. And there was a lot of learning that happened, and he was asking some questions after year 3 or 4, right? You know, he's nice about it, but it was a big concern that we were not going to be able to make ends meet. And so reducing labor cost helped us. The business side of things is the other challenge. You know, you can grow the most wonderful food. How do you market that great food? That was the other big aspect here. So you go in with your new crop, and yeah, we're humming. Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot for being like a punk rock agriculture iconoclast, but the crop rotation thing, is that disavowing crop rotation in general, or just that you haven't had problems with pathogens that would require it since you started no-till?
That's the big reason. So the whole concept of crop rotation is from industrial agriculture, where it was really became necessary, you know, after a crop of corn or grass, to go in with a leguminous plant, soy, and that's what we see in the Midwest of the United States. It's corn and soy, which are alternated. But we have found that it's not necessary. And so I'm not saying that in your context or anybody else's context it's not necessary, just hasn't been necessary for us. In fact, my theory is, maybe it's a little wild, you can tell me what you think of it, is that this crop here will have attracted, like we actually had some issues here with cabbage maggot. It's in its adult stage, a little fly, looks like a house fly. In its larval stage, the fly lays eggs near the base of the plant. Those little eggs hatch, out comes this little white larva, looks like a fly larva that you find in a dead animal. and that thing goes around and starts eating roots of your plant. And they were quite bad in this area. But somebody came along and dealt with that. Whether that was a virus maybe, or maybe it was like beetles. I've seen beetles, like that's spent a lot of time on my hands and knees just looking around the base of the plant, finding out what's happening. But somebody dealt with it. Nature took care of it. I didn't apply any sprays. We don't use any sprays at all on the farm. I should point that out right now. Not even organic sprays. 0 sprays at all. There was a crop of larkspur right in here. This was larkspur. They were really tall. We just mowed them down. We find that in the hedgerows to have perennial crops for hideouts for beetles. I'm destroying beetles now, I'm sure of it. But their populations are so great that there's going to be some hidden elsewhere and they're going to move back in. So my theory is that if I plant the same crop in the same area, the predators are already existing in order to take out the bad guys. And I'm also know that the soil fertility here, as we built this up, probably this has been in no-till for 6 years, 7 years, is going to be so abundant. So I think that crop rotation comes about from a mindset of a scarcity mentality. But I like to come across from an abundance mentality. There's so much fertility available. There's so many beneficial organisms available that, you know, we don't have to worry about rotating this crop. So today, we're not going to do it today, but I would get my dibbler, I'd dibble holes, I'd get the next transplants, they'd go in, and compost first, and then the new transplants, and we're done. Okay, it'd probably be better off to wait 3-4 days as this materials decomposes before the new ones go in, but again, I wouldn't hesitate to do that right away. There was another question from one of you that, okay, then I'll just show you the tractor here, and I'll probably just go down this bed here. This was flailed on Friday. Okay, so this stuff here, start to see some life in there, and that's a great thing. But I'm going to put the compost on regardless and show you how that machine works. It's a top dresser from the golf course, or the people that produce turf or make turf for lawns, and they use these machines for dropping sand. And we modified it a little bit, but I paid $1,000 for the machine, and so it's very cost effective, and it just keeps working. We replaced the chain once, but apart from that, so it's very cheap, and so we have to get resourceful. Now, it doesn't drop it as consistently as I'd like. It kind of, you know, kind of comes out in spurts and blobs, but it's better than going with a wheelbarrow. So that's what we use. And then the tractor itself, that came really cheap a number of years ago. Now they're a lot more expensive, but that's a very simple system. Yeah.
This green stuff, I just wanted to ask, you're not worried about that?
No.
I've got a ton of it, and
Yeah, so like this moss, yeah. I don't think it's great. I'm not sure why. Well, I know why it's there. It's because this area, this farm is very low, and we have quite a bit of sitting water in the winter time, and I think some of that moss may have come from that. But I don't worry about it. Yeah, life goes on. What I'm putting on in this little wagon is a bit of horse manure, shavings. Actually, it's almost straight shavings, and that were sitting around. I got them last year with a bit of wood chips. That's all it is. And so I don't really worry about what I'm putting on in terms of, like, I didn't take that to a lab and get exact analysis on what type of compost that was. You may want to go that route. I haven't done a soil test on the farm since we started. Some guy came on and did a soil test once, but I have not done any soil test whatsoever. I'm not saying that's smart. I'm just telling you that I think there's so many other things I need to be worrying about right now, but I think eventually we should be doing regular soil tests. We should be looking at and also by soil test I mean we should be putting things under the microscope and see what's actually living in our soil. Those are good things to know. Yeah.
Is this a good time to ask about sourcing materials for compost, or should we wait till the end?
About which material?
Sourcing materials for like wood chips and stuff? Or
You can ask now, or I can talk about that later. Yeah. I will definitely address that. Where are you going to get your materials? How can you get things cost effectively enough? Definitely. So bring that up after. So I'm going to take this machine. It's pretty non-violent. So, but I do want to come down this bed here, so you have to give me some space, and I'll show you what this thing can do. So it's basically just a belt that turns. It brings material to the back, and then there's a drum in the back that spins, and it spreads it. I like this one because it only drops the material in the existing bed that you're using. So those traditional manure spreaders, they kind of throw it. They're meant to throw it a little wider. So this one is a really effective job. Okay. That's it. So that's a lot faster than that wheelbarrow, right?
So is that this 1 inch already now?
No, this is not 1 inch. This, I would say that's a bit less than that. It started out as 1 inch. You can see it's not as consistent maybe as I would like, but it's making do. And I'm going to be working with some guys this winter time we do some of these projects. So I would like that thing to be more consistent in how it drops. The material I can put in there now, I have to put nice fluffy material in. I'd like to be able to put sticks and twigs in there as well, and it tends to clog up with that type of material. So we're working on that, but it's doing the job. So this now would be, I don't really like to plant same day after introducing compost. So we would turn the water on, and we wait about 6 days, 7 days, something like that, about a week before we actually plant our new crop in there, and then it's off. And you can see, I also can use this machine as a top dresser, so I took it over the squash. Now squash is not going to be that happy with that, the delicata squash, but we'll use it as a top dresser as well over existing crops. And that way we can introduce fertility while the crop is growing. So once we've refined the system, I would have different compost for different applications. I find that important as well. I like to put wood chips in that machine and just even top dress directly with wood chips right over top. I like wood chips around my plants. I think it allows larger organisms like millipedes and beetles and isopods and things like that to find habitat in and around the plant. Do you have a question?
Yeah, when you talked about shaping beds, I guess back in the establishment part.
Yeah.
Most of the bed shapers I've seen have run right behind tillers or just been part of tillers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you use?
Yeah, so there's she's talking about bed shaping and the different implements you can use for shaping beds. There is behind the walk-behind BCS tiller or BCS a bed shaper that actually brings the material from the pathway onto a bit of a mound. We don't use mounds here. Everything's flat. If we do have a mound, it's not because we've mounded things, it's because the pathways are sunken. So the pathways sink because machinery is heavy, and sometimes if you come in the spring, it pushes down and the beds look like they're raised. But we don't mound any beds. Everything's on the flat, and that's what I prefer to work with. My whole problem with those bed shapers is that, again, we're talking about massive soil disturbance. And so I'm quite against that idea of using that. And plus, those mounds are eventually going to degrade and they're going to need to be reshaped, those beds.
So when you say set your beds, you just mean like establish where you're going to dry.
Yeah.
And where you're going to set.
Yeah. Mark out where your beds are going to be, and then forever after you're set. Any other questions about the establishment stage or anything I've showed you now?
So this is the only nutrient you apply, right? The compost.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, and in terms of material, where do we source or how do we source? I am working with a bunch of big companies that take material from particularly mushroom farms. Okay, so there's a bunch of mushroom farms in the area. My criteria is I only want material from organic mushroom farms, and there's actually quite a few in the valley here, quite a few organic mushroom composting facilities. They are only going to sell material on the scale of a semi-truckload. They don't want to go out of their way, or they'll charge you for it, and with fuel prices being what they are and labor costs being what they are, they're going to charge you a lot for that. The other material that I'll take on the farm is wood chips. So these are from the wood chip companies that they chop down trees for our neighborhood, and a lot of the branches and leaves go through the chipper. That's the material that I covet most. I prefer composted wood chips mixed with a little bit of mushroom compost rather than, or more than any other material in the area. Wood chips give you a fungally dominant compost. And fungal dominance is very, very important. You will be able to create fungal dominant compost by allowing it to sit for long enough, and that's what Andrew is going to talk about later on in the day. And how do you take raw wood chips, raw materials, and create the best compost imaginable? Okay, so in terms of sourcing, there's some big companies out there. You can call them, and I can give you their names. And chances are they're not willing to deal with a little guy, and so that's going to be a challenge. And they will charge you a lot of money. Yeah.
In terms of fertility, are you getting all of your fertility from the compost? Or are you using break crops? You say you don't rotate. So is it purely that additional compost that?
Yeah, so it's the additional compost for fertility and also the existing crop that's being shredded up on the surface. And that's all the fertility we're using. I don't use any other sources of fertility. Yeah.
Do you find either in different sections on the farm or between different farms that that are low-till or no-till, that like soil type factors in your type of management?
I haven't got that sophisticated yet to apply different types of compost based on existing conditions. Mostly it's just, this has been 10 years. I know it sounds like a long time, but it's just been produce the crop, get your machinery efficient, get down fertility. And I think now at this stage we're probably ready to take it to that level and say, hey, let's, we have because the farm is quite large and there are different soil types on the farm. This area is a little sandier. This area is poor draining. Let's use this approach over here. Let's apply that type of compost over here. I think that's a necessity going forward in order to take it to the next level. But in your first years, you can make, I think those things will make very small incremental changes, whereas today we can make massive changes by just, changing a few things, or that's what we've been able to do for the past 10 years. Okay, so my thinking is with trees that we're getting from the area, trees are extremely deep rooting and they're bringing up minerals and nutrients from really, really deep down. And my theory, again, this needs to be tested probably, is that every region of the world has its own built-in fertility, and the native resources should be sufficient for that particular area to grow. I don't see any reason why I need to be bringing in, say, rock dust or algae or other things. I believe that trees in our area can provide us with all the nutrients that are required to sustain life on our farm. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but so far it's been working. And my way for testing soil fertility is by looking at how the crop performs. And if the plants are doing well and we have really lush, dark green plants that taste really good, that have built-in immunity, that can fend off pests, then that to me is an indication that soil must be healthy. Yeah.
So talking about trees, the walnut trees, I guess they're walnuts, right?
Yeah.
Did you plant them as a crop, as a wind barrier, all of the above, or?
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, so wind, we get these outflow winds in the summertime. Wind is good, but I think we just need to slow it down a little bit. So walnut trees are doing that for us. And also we are probably now 20% perennial, maybe 15% perennial, and 80 to 85% annual. And again, my thinking is, again, I haven't tested these theories or whatever, but I think farms need to flip those numbers around to go 85% perennial and 15% annual. I would like to see a lot more perennial crops on the farm. Trees, fruit-bearing trees, grapes, and that's why you see what we're doing. A lot of it's experimental at this stage, but we are kind of moving towards that. Also, it's a 35-acre farm. For it to be manageable by fewer people, the way to do that is to go more perennial crops, and that's what we're doing. And also trees, they're deep rooting, they hold soil really well, and improve porosity. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you care about the type of wood? Like is seed?
We don't worry about any of the, so he's asking about wood types that we bring in on the farm. I don't worry about any of that. So cedar, walnut, those are kind of like prohibited woods that you use on a farm, apparently. We mix that in the compost as we would all other types of wood types and not pay any attention to that. It hasn't been a concern. And a lot of people are concerned with tying up nitrogen by the introduction of wood onto your farm. So in order to break down that woody material, the microorganisms require a significant amount of energy and are looking for a nitrogen source, and the way they find that is by robbing the area around the wood chips in order to do that. So, but because we don't incorporate the wood chips down below the surface, there's no tying up of the nitrogen down below the surface. If anywhere, it's strictly on the surface, but roots are going down, and so that's where their nitrogen source is. And tilling wood chips into your land is, you're going to pay the price for many, many years, as you got to introduce a lot of nitrogen in order to pay that back. So we just strew layer on the surface, and that's all we do. Any other questions? Yeah.
What perennials do you have so far, and like what are you looking at?
We have cherry trees, so both the sour cherry and the sweet cherry. Sour cherries have worked really, really well, except this year. We didn't get any sour cherries at all. I was singing their praises and telling everybody to put sour cherries in, and then this year, because it was so wet and cool, and we had frost shortly after flowering, didn't work out very well, but the plants didn't die, hopefully next year. Apples, and if you're looking for apples in this wetter region, you want to look for varieties that are, more resistant to the rain and can withstand some of the problems that you can have in very wet areas with apples. Pear trees, quite a few pears, Asian pears. Plums, we lost a lot of our plum trees over winter because of the flood. Unfortunately, I was again bragging about plums and why they should be on everybody's farms, and then those ones we struggled with, especially the Japanese varieties of plums. They do really, really well. Walnut trees, those are hazelnut trees, that grove where the pigs are, and we got more hazelnut trees. I think they're really essential. And then black currants, we have elderberry. We'll be passing through some of this and check out some of these other perennial crops that they're recommended. And by other, what we're also trying to do is within that 15 to 25% of perennial crops have flowers as well. And the flowers we're looking for is flowers that attract beneficial predatorial insects, flowers that grow tall, are robust, produce a lot of carbon, flowers that don't cast their seed all over the farm and cause weed problems. That's another big issue. So we want something that we can mow down, like the larkspur. I'm not going to have larkspur again on the farm because it wasn't attracting the pollinators. It's beautiful in a bouquet, but it wasn't doing what it should have been doing, what I thought it might do. So those are some of the criteria that I have. And I also want plants that grow upright with strong, sturdy stems that don't blow over, because the larkspur, what it was doing, it was falling over into the beds beside, and that was becoming a big problem. So echinacea is really great, bee balm, monarda, agastache, sage obviously is a herb and a flower as well. So those types of crops are really, really good to have on your farm. So I would like to see eventually, within that 25%, lots and lots of flowers. We have a bit of flowers and we'll see more as we go. Any other questions? So that was kind of like switching from pasture, very much soil disturbed areas, into minimal soil disturbance or no-till, and we can take a look around and see other things on the farm as well. Yeah.
Any plans for the course of the day to talk about integrating the irrigation into that first couple years of setup, or would you rather not go into that?
Yeah, so again, I'm very fortunate, and I recognize my privilege here is that my family owns Southern Irrigation, so I have that benefit of having very cost-effective irrigation and all the expertise. So I've been, and I don't say it boastfully, it is what it is, and that's where we're at. Anyway, we set up the irrigation right from the start with a main line. We have an 8-inch well. It's bringing up the water from about 170 feet down, and that's being pumped up with a fairly large pump, and every acre on the farm is a separate zone, and it's got an electric valve that we can set on a timer. And so everything is set up so that we need less people to manage things. So this sprinkler system here, this is called a Maganet, and these lines, there's a 2-inch sub main that's underneath the ground here, so a 2-inch pipe that's underground here, and that's feeding each line. Sprinklers are about 30 feet apart, these Maganets, 30 feet on a 30 by 30 grid, and they actually require less water than some of the other sprinklers that are out there, and that's why we use them. And we put them in the hedgerows. Actually, so we have the hedgerows planted where the irrigation goes. So every 30 feet, we have a line of sprinklers that come up, and that's where we put our perennial crops. The idea was that then we don't have to move the lines out very often. Once a year, when we mow that crop down, we move the irrigation out, then we put it back in, and so there's less moving of irrigation, and that's been a huge benefit. But even if you are working with I'll show you a mini sprinkler system later on that's very cost effective that I think you might want to think about if you have half acre, quarter acre, 1 acre, use a mini sprinkler system, and you'll discover that it's the time you save, the money you save on water, number one. They're very efficient and very uniform in their spray. The time you save not moving irrigation around with a very simple timer, if you can foot the money up front, is going to save you lots of money over the years. And these systems like this, it's all plastic, these Maganets will run for 20 or 50 years. So no wear and tear there. Other than the coyotes which come in and they like to chew on the lines, that's been our only problem with the irrigation system. So we put it in once, we do it right, and then we don't have to worry about it later on. I do know that this system is fairly costly, but the mini sprinkler system that I'll show you later is actually quite cost effective. Okay, we're gonna go down over that way. I don't have a time device on me, so. So this is the last succession of the brassicas. So we do cabbage, you've seen the cabbages, the green cabbage, red cabbage, and Savoy cabbage in the first bed. Then the next bed over is going to be broccoli and broccoli, and then cauliflower and cauliflower. And we do that like one thing that we found that if you keep things consistent and the systems are in place, it may not be the best necessarily for the market, and may not be the best for what customers are wanting, but it's the best for us, and it keeps things very, very consistent. And we'll do that every week throughout the year. So this is what, you know, what the other ones look like when they were little babies, and that's at the stage we plant them. And then you can see the succession, the evolution as they go from little babies into the bigger crops. This was strawberries about 2 weeks ago. We got the flail mower out, we mowed the strawberries down 3-4 passes, and then we put compost on top. Really, really thick. About 6 or 7 of those loads with the wagon right over top, and then about a week later we planted right into it. And they're going to do really, really well, and we don't have to worry about the strawberries. Now again, that's a lot of resources, right? It's a lot of costs there. The other way to do that would have been to mow the strawberries, let them regrow, mow them again, let them regrow. They'll get tired eventually, and finally put in your next crop, right? Or the tiller, right? So I was quite content to do this on top of the strawberries. This was an area that didn't get a lot of fertility the last number of years, and now it'll be ready to go. So that's one way of dealing with troublesome crops like strawberries, which are quite aggressive. You can actually see some popping through right here, and I know that I'm going to see them throughout, and we'll just dig them out when we see them. This corn here behind you was planted with the intention of probably taking it out or maybe getting a crop for the market. Corn is very low value crop. So per bed, we might harvest 300 cobs, 500 cobs, so about $300 or $500 per bed, which isn't a lot of money. So carrots, on the other hand, can yield probably 1,000 pounds at $2 a pound or $2.50 a pound, so it's $2,500 for one bed of carrots. So you can see we have to make these decisions. Even though the market may demand corn, what's best for us as farmers? You got to listen to your customers, I get that, but on the other hand, they might have to just find their corn somewhere else. Problem is, you're not going to find a lot of organically grown corn in the valley here. So for that reason, we might keep it. But then this one here, this crop, the same decision might have to be made. And then if we go down here, this corn you can see is doing okay, but on the far end you'll see it's kind of yellowy. That was a big hole that we filled up with a lot of compost and wood chips, and it's just not doing very well. So I'm just happy having a crop in there, and now I might have to make the decision to terminate it and put a new crop in. But other than that, this corn would just be grown. Maybe we'll get some cobs off it, but it produces a stand, say 5 feet tall, and then it'll provide a great cover crop for winter, maybe feed the birds, and you know, so those are some of the things that we have to make decisions about as we go forward. Yeah.
Was this direct seeded or transplanted?
This direct seeded, yeah.
Too late to seed corn?
It is, yeah, I think anyway. The latest you seed corn in our area is like week 26, which is exactly halfway the year, 26th week of the year. So I think we're past that. Summer solstice. Okay, we'll just keep moving, take a look at the onions here.
How big are these trees going to get?
Probably 20 feet tall. Yeah, so that begs the question, what do you grow in between here as your trees are maturing, right? I know we're up against that. Like the way I kind of see it is, so the problem we're going to have eventually is these trees are going to shade out crops. See my walnuts there? Those are 9 years old or 8 years old. That's getting to be a pretty big tree. Eventually there's going to be a lot of shade on the one side. And so what we might do at that point in time is say cut out every other one, thin the tree, make a decision whether the market needs all the land in order to survive financially, and then maybe just leave the trees to grow and put the pigs underneath there, something like that. So those are the questions I have. I figure that if you plant a tree it can always be cut down. It wasn't there. I hate cutting down trees, but it wasn't there before, and you put it there. And I try to plant a lot of trees with that in mind. I might need to remove some of these down the road. For now, we can grow our crops in between the trees. Eventually, we might not have that luxury. But these onions here, just want to talk about, these are Walla Walla. So these allow us to get an early start for market. We have these in the market right now. We have found, and the question you might have about onions is, do you direct seed or do you transplant? We experiment every year with both. We put in some transplanted, some direct seed, and we're kind of discovering that direct seeding, it's a lot less work. You don't need to start them super early in a greenhouse with all that extra heat. Direct seeding can produce almost as large an onion as a transplanted onion, and it's significantly less work. So there is, if you walk down, I could show you some of the beds here. The Walla Wallas up front are quite large, and then some of the ones in the back were transplanted, but they're not much behind. Okay, or they were direct seeded, they're not much behind. And so I don't see any huge advantage in transplanting, just because you require that extra heat at the beginning of the season. And then there's a lot of work involved in putting these little babies in the ground and some of the other challenges with that. So we grow the Walla Walla as a sweet onion, not very much, only 5 beds. That hopefully is sold through the market as a fresh onion with the greens on. And then we move on to the more storage type onions. This is a red onion that not as big as it probably could be, but they're going to grow a bit yet. So these were again transplanted. And then my favorite type of onion here is this variety called Hamilton. You can see most of the fronts of our beds aren't performing too well. The edge effect, probably because this driveway was a mud hole and we were actually driving at the front of the beds in order to get off the driveway. But yeah, so they're not doing quite as well. But this onion is called Hamilton, and it's a, oh shoot, I broke it. It's a massive onion. Like, this is going to produce a huge 1 pound onion off here. And this fertility, this area has been in no-till probably 3 or 4 years. And so this is the reality. This is what you should be realizing after a bit of time. Layering on, like I've been doing, mushroom compost, bit of wood chips, whatever you can get your hands on, and you can build that fertility. So this is all no-till as well. And that's where we're at. So that's looking really good. Okay, any questions about onions?
Well, not about onions specifically, but in terms of how you treat the soil before you grow, do you do things any differently if you're transplanting and direct seeding?
No, there would be no difference. So I'll show you the transplanted beds. We'll take a look at that. But this area, I would have preferred to put fresh compost on this spring, but we could not get on the land. As soon as there was an opening in the weather and things are drying up, then the rain came again. And so we could not put the compost on, which meant there was a lot more weeding, but and a little less fertility for this crop. So potatoes were in here last year. And but there was no special treatment other than that we took the flail over top, and the flail just allows us to flatten the bed because we had potatoes in, so it's kind of rough and bumpy, and we did not have a cover crop in over winter. And then we transplanted the onions right in the little holes that the dibbler gave us, and in the direct seeded we just passed over with the seeder after flailing as well. The flail allows us to create a really nice fine layer at the surface, and so when we talk about like purist in the sense of no-till, there has to be, in my opinion, some slight intervention at the surface, some way to create a seed bed. Because if you are planting in really coarse material or something that's very compact, you're trying to get seeds in there, you're going to have some challenges. So there's that little bit of disturbance at the surface that we do with the flail mower, and we can see directly into that. But I wanted to show you the the direct seeded ones.
You're saying flail, seed, then compost.
No, I would prefer to compost first,
Okay.
and then flail, and then seed.
Compost,
Yeah,
flail, then seed.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Dallas, these are direct seeded, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So you can compare those, and it's Cabernet.
yeah, those are
Yeah.
Cabernet,
Yeah.
and then there's some other varieties. Yeah, but this is all Cabernet. These
Yeah.
two beds here, yeah.
So those red onions you've seen in that other area are the same variety of onions. It's not very scientific because we should have put them side by side, and it should have been a double blind test or whatever you call those. But it's the same type of onion, but this one's direct seeded. So you can imagine our seeder is a 4-row seeder. One guy from this end to the other end seeding takes less than a minute. And then you walk away. But the work of transplanting, seeding all these flats, all the transplant trays, hoping they don't dry out, and you get a super good frost, and you're trying to heat your greenhouse to 18 to 20 degrees for a month. A lot of heat required, a lot of energy. Compared to direct seeding, to me it's a no-brainer. You go direct seed. This is in a year with a very cold spring. So my onions might be a little smaller.
But when did you plant this?
Is there a number on that front of that tag? No. Dallas? Do you remember?
All the direct seeded stuff was between April 15 and April 30.
Okay.
All the direct seeded onions.
So late April.
But it should have been earlier, I think.
Yeah. If we could have done it earlier, we would have, but again, it was very wet, and so we had a hard time getting out here. And those other transplants were started in the greenhouse in February. Do you remember that cold spell we had in February? Like, we were spending probably $50 a day to heat that greenhouse. And then all the carbon emissions and all the rest, right? So direct seeding, it may give us a little smaller onion, but I actually don't think the difference is going to be significant. We also didn't space these, so they're very close together, so the end result might be more poundage per bed, which I think is a win, maybe a little smaller onion. But we're finding the same thing with other crops as well, like direct seeding is an advantage. Also the onions, when they're seeded, the challenge, or when they're transplanted, the challenge is that they dry out. They need a lot of babying in that first week or two. And you might need to put the irrigation on. Some years you got to put the irrigation on in April or May. This year not, but so then they require more babying. And so this is something to think about with your onions. Okay, I think we're probably at 12 o'clock. I'll answer questions and then take a break. Okay, sure. Yeah.
What are you guys seeding with? Direct seeding.
What's that?
What are you guys direct seeding with?
We use a Jang seeder. It's a 4-row Jang seeder. I'll show you the seeder when we get inside. One row, we used to do things with a 1-row seeder, 4 times up and down the bed. 4-row just makes a lot more sense, right? Trying to minimize our workload. So these are the faithful weeders on the farm. We weeded through here 2 weeks ago. It should have been last week. Sometimes we get behind. So it's going to take them a little longer going through, but it's still fairly quick. And you'd be surprised, actually, the kids prefer weeding, and we actually all prefer weeding on the farm above most other tasks. It's more relaxing. You just get to work with a group. So that's not very common, right? Weeding is seen to be the worst job on the farm. While we're here, I can talk about carrots, and then we'll go for our break. Carrots obviously are direct seeded. You can walk down beds, I'm okay with that. You can take a look. You'll see actually a lot of ladybug activity on here. Like, I'm not just talking about a little bit, but just This one leaf here has 3 or 4 nymphs. Okay, and it seems like the lady beetle is very much attracted to plants in the, I think it's the Apiaceae family, like carrots and fennel and dill, bronze fennel, and they just are really attracted. So I'm not sure why they're here and why they're here in such numbers. My suspicion is that these things had earlier on a little white mite that was growing. We noticed that we harvested, that was carrots before, now it's cabbage. There was a little white mite on them. We were picking the carrots, and they were strewn all over. It didn't affect the carrot itself. And so I think these guys maybe moved in to take care of them. Why they're here, they're very welcome. So far this year I've seen no aphids on any of our brassicas. So that's, again, brings up the diversity, the importance of biodiversity. So they're everywhere in here. I'll pull some of these so you can see. We usually don't need a shovel for harvesting carrots. Fairly straight. They're not as straight as they could be. I'm happy with that. A little hairy. Okay, and that's not always the greatest attribute on a carrot. No forks, but they're all acceptable. The outside row, oh, that one's split. A little harder to pull out because we got more compaction along the edge, but actually almost looking better than the ones that were in the center. So that sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. So using the system I talked about from transitioning from pasture or grassy meadow into no-till, you should be able to do carrots already in your second year. The first year, right, you're setting things up. The second year, you should be able to do carrots. They might not be as long and as beautiful, but harvest them a little earlier. And I really like to do carrots because they obviously pretty good at penetrating deep into the soil, breaking things up, and you'll get good results even in your first year of no-till. It's not a problem. I know that whole debate about, or that whole idea of tilling is because we think we need to somehow break up the soil and make it softer for the carrots to go deep. But the soil organisms do that for us so much better than we could ever imagine. And so this area here hasn't been tilled in, I think this is 8 or 9 years right now, 8 years for sure. So that's a long time. We like to grow carrots here just because we know they perform well, and so every year carrots go back in usually. And now we've swapped it out with winter cabbage, but yeah.
Is there a time of the season where you guys are lugging row cover out and stuff for these? Or?
No, we don't do any row cover. For carrot rust fly, we have had carrot rust fly. I claimed once that we didn't have carrot rust fly, and some local farmer said BS. He came out and he found carrot rust fly, and but it wasn't like it was everywhere, and so I'm not going to claim I don't have it because one of you might find it. But it hasn't become a problem.
That's way more impressive.
Yeah.
Like having it and having it not be all the carrots is way cooler than just magically not having it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So carrot rust fly does exist, but it's never been a problem for us to the degree where we've had to like throw out a crop because there's so much carrot rust fly. Why that is, I don't know. I could only say it's probably because we do no-till and we have a lot of biodiversity, but to claim, or maybe our soil type or some other factor, I just don't know why that is, and that's rare for this area. And typically gardeners, especially once they have it, it seems like they can never get rid of carrot rust fly. It's there every year causing problems. Yeah.
There's actually a question that I may have missed. What type of production was before you took over?
This is a dairy farm. Yeah, for forever before that. Ever since the first farmers came to this area in about 1905, I think. It was a dairy farm, and formerly they were pasturing cows. It would have been more sustainable, the type of agriculture system they were using back then. It would have been more subsistence farming, probably diverse, not just cows, but other types of animals on the farm. But the last 10 years, I know for sure, when this farm was purchased, 10 years before us was all cows, but they were all indoors all the time so the cows wouldn't have been on the land, and it would have been in corn and grass for a long time before that. I'll grab my shovel and I'll dig in here, and just to show you what the soil looks like after a bunch of years of no-till. So see some no carrots came up here, and I'll just notice there's no carrots growing there, but there's roots everywhere, right? So here, chocolatey, brown, it's actually fairly crumbly and dry. This is like lots and lots of compost over the years. I don't expect you necessarily to be able to have this after even this many years. Okay, some areas of the farm won't look like this. And you can see as we get down, there's the clay, the roots of the carrots are everywhere, and more the decomposing wood chips. So that's what we have there. It's actually really dry. I found it quite dry. And if I keep going, we'll see if I can get the next layer here. It's very heavy clay. Well, I shouldn't say that, because when I said that last time, I had some people say, you want to see heavy clay? Come to my farm, and indeed, they had much heavier clay than we did. It's quite hard to get out, but this is see the roots of the carrots are still there. Okay? And carrots weren't even growing close here. So yeah, this is what we're up against. You notice, I don't know if you noticed, as you're walking down the pathway there, like the mud really clings to your shoes. That's what we were up against when we just started. The first year we were tillers. We tilled heavily, and we planted our onions, and then the weeds came and we couldn't weed. We were scraping off the weeds with our hose, and it was just a nightmare. So we did that for the first 2 years. What's that?
How far down was that clay?
This clay is probably about a foot, 6-8 inches down before we start hitting the clay. And that's just layering and layering. But again, it's a lot of material that's on here. And I could go to a different area and you might see different results. Like in the rhubarb here, we put a lot more wood chips in the perennial crops. They like a fungal dominant soil. You can actually see the mycelium there. And the wormholes. I don't actually see a lot of worms. Okay. Yeah, another one. Okay, so quite a bit of mycelium in there. That's what we like to see. And broken down material. And flip this around, you can kind of see the heavier clay, but you can see a lot of the mixing even down here. So we didn't till, but you find a lot of the organics in this area, more so than we did in that first sample. And then up top is nice and crumbly, and so lots of mycelium growing in there. Notice the carrot tops. So when we harvested these beds of carrots, we got rid of all the carrot tops because my flail actually can't chop up those fibrous stems, and so we said, okay, just get them out. We threw all the tops around the rhubarb, and then we put some compost down and we planted our cabbage. So this here was where I violated a very important concept of never disturb soil. This has been disturbed with the power harrow. And I'm kind of thinking maybe we need to look at a hybrid model between no-till and some disturbance, but I bet it's going to bite us in the butt somewhere, and I kind of anticipate that to happen. The power harrow here was set at probably 1 inch. We wanted to just experiment breaking up just that top layer just once, like once to do this disturbance. And what happened was it was much nicer to plant the brassicas in this. Okay, it's a little more broken up, and it was way quicker to plant. We found that when we plant in an area that was not tilled or disturbed on the surface, it's really hard to get those transplants in. So we were coming along with after a dibbler came along, we were actually still had to kind of pop holes in there with a stick, and then we put the plant in there. Here we didn't have to do that. We could just push the transplant right into the hole, and it was a lot quicker and a lot easier. So I wanted to be clear about that, with that confession, because, you know, I want to maintain an open mind, and I used to be very religious about the no-till and kind of walk around with this idea of, oh, you till? Oh, you horrible person. We don't till, you know, like that kind of approach. But I don't think we should be there. I think we should see what other people are doing. But if you are going to do some disturbance of soil, definitely do not do it in the spring or the fall or the winter. For sure, just in the summer. So now what I'm going to do is, when these brassicas are a bit bigger, I'm going to get my machine, the compost machine, and I'm going to put a really coarse wood chippy material on there. These are winter brassicas. They're the 10 to 15 pound type cabbages, and the ground will be covered with the wood chips around them. Probably by the time I go over here, 3-4 passes will be probably 2-3 inches thick with wood chips right on top. I like to really mulch heavily around my brassicas. Okay, yep.
Would you consider trialing when you talk about labor being down? I assume the harrow is less labor than people going with something like sticks. So if you had to use the harrow in some instances, then using like an organic spray to help get those nutrients in quicker?
Yeah, that's something to think about. Andrew actually is going to be helping me with trying to develop like an organic or just like a compost tea or a compost extract to try to get that fertility in there. Yeah, that's something we would definitely think about. But again, most of our decisions here are based on labor. We get the labor cost down, and so in this case, the power harrow really sped up things. One zip over with the power harrow. We're not doing like a fine grind of the surface. It's just one zip over top, 1/2 inch deep. The dibbler over top of that, plant, walk away. So I think this probably took them no more than 10 minutes with 3 people to plant up these 5 beds. And then they're on to the next thing. Okay. So our transplanting, just to give an idea of how fast that would be, is approximately this fast. Okay, so just to give you an idea, and that's why when I say, right, so they're breaking off these plants and planting them in. It's a very quick operation, and so then they can get back to the other things, and yeah. Okay, we'll take a break. Okay, we're going to get restarted here, and I just wanted to cover a bunch of topics in the afternoon. I want to show you how we do transplants and how I think you can do transplants at your place without investing in a costly greenhouse. And I want to talk about the profitability end, okay, the financial aspect of doing a market, and I wanted to show you the irrigation system, the cheaper irrigation system, the cost-effective one that will water your garden really well. And then we'll take a look, and we'll go out in the field again and take a look at how we do our salad mixes and our cut and come crops that we have going on out there. So I think we'll just start here just because we're near this little garden. I'll flick on the irrigation here just so you can see what the mini sprinkler system does. And you could think about that as maybe something you want to do in your garden. So come over this way. So we're getting a lot of wind right now, but you get the idea. So I think this system costs about $85, and it's watering 40 feet by 40 feet, and you can actually swap out these heads, these little mini sprinklers. You can swap them out, and you can get them to spray in a 15-foot diameter, so 30 feet circle. That's how much area these things can cover. And you can see there's very little water. And what I've found on the farm here is that we water frequently throughout the heat of the day in small spurts. So we'll water 5 to 10 times a day on hot days. So tomorrow they're expecting 27. This irrigation will go on 5 to 7 times for maybe 5 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes. We're trying to cool the plants, and we're going to try to cool the soil, and we want moisture on the ground to increase the biological activity on the surface, because beetles and millipedes and centipedes and other organisms won't wander out if it's bone dry and super hot, but they will come out, venture out and do their work throughout the heat of the day when it's cool. And so that's what I find is really effective. So little mini sprinkler, this is running off a 1/2 inch line, and I could probably run another 5 to 10 sprinklers just using this, and that's like a household amount of water that you're getting out of your household. So off your faucet that's attached to your home. So a very effective way to water, and I wanted to point it out as opposed to the more expensive system I was showing you before. Okay, so that's all. While we're here, we might as well take a look at this greenhouse. You can come right on in if you like. Kind of see what's going on. These are, this is right full of cherry tomatoes and some basil and ginger as well that's growing up along the side. You'll notice the ginger along the side that doesn't open is very tall and happy. The ginger along the other side is very short and cold. Ginger needs a lot of heat, but it's a totally doable crop in our region indoors. These cherry tomatoes, kind of, I wanted to point out the same idea as we apply out in the field, is that weekly or bi-weekly addition of compost around the base of the plants. And so you can see the compost that we threw down, and this is well compost. This compost that's been sitting around on the farm on a pile for about 2 years, and that's what we'll just keep adding and adding and adding every 2 weeks, depending on how much labor we have available. But if the kids are looking for work, and if it's a rainy day, chances are they're probably going to be putting compost down in the greenhouse with buckets. So come in, 1 bucket for 2 plants, and that's what we'll keep introducing throughout the season. And in that mulch, you can actually notice that the roots quickly find their way into the mulch. You can see right here at the surface that most of the roots on your tomato plant are surface feeding, right? So they're right there at the surface, consuming whatever nutrients are available that are provided by the microorganisms. So plants, to quickly talk about the soil food web, because this may be less familiar to you, it may be very familiar, and I'm not going to pretend I know everything about it. But the soil food web was a term that was coined by Elaine Ingham. I believe that she is kind of the mother of this, not this idea, but she formalized it. Talk about the soil food web. Plants are producing up to 50% of the carbon sugars that plants produce are sent down into the soil to feed soil microorganisms. So these carbon exudates that the plants are sending down are food for microorganisms, and they're feeding particularly bacteria and fungi, which are at the bottom of that soil food web. Fungi and bacteria consume these tasty tidbits and lock them away and hold them in their biomass. Along comes organisms higher up on the food chain or the soil food web, such as nematodes and protozoa, amoeba, all the things you learned about in Chemistry 11 or Biology 11 in high school. They come along, they start to eat these organisms because they require them to build for energy and to build up their biomass. And in the process, there is going to be some elimination of waste that these higher level organisms don't require from the food they've eaten. That passes out as plant available nutrients in exactly the right form and the right spot for plants to absorb. Of course, the higher up in the food chain, we got earthworms, for example, are moving around, taking in soil that's full of nematodes and protozoa and amoeba and fungi and all the other things that they're eating, and they're excreting other plant available foods. They're doing that in the vicinity of the plants. Earthworms are going way down deep into the earth, pulling up minerals and other things, depositing them around the plant roots. And so we see this feeding frenzy that is happening in and around plant roots. And that's what we're trying to create on our farms and in our gardens, is a flourishing soil food web. And that's why we're introducing aged, fungally dominant compost that is going to provide food not directly for the plants, but first for the microorganisms that live in the soil, and the food web can develop. And that's another reason why soil disturbance is such an awful thing. That's why soil disturbance is so disturbing, because what we're doing in the process is we're destroying the very life that we want to find in our soil, particularly bacteria, which is highly sensitive, or fungi, which is highly sensitive to soil disturbances. And so in order to maintain that biodiversity within our soil, we need to park the tiller for good and move towards a system that doesn't require this heavy invasive treatment on our land. And so that's why every week, and the thing is, you've got to get beyond this idea that you're feeding this crop of tomatoes. You're feeding soil microbiology, but you're also feeding future crops that are going to be planted here. And unfortunately, that's why people who lease land, and that's why this whole idea, the people who say, oh, not all of us can afford land, but leasing land is kind of the same thing. It's really not. And the reason it's not is because when you don't own the land, there's no guarantee you're going to have the land in your possession or in the possession of your children or in the possession of people that care 10, 20, 30 years down the road. When you add nutrition to soil, you are thinking with a long-term mentality, and that's why land ownership becomes so important. Also for the reason of growing trees or orchards or developing vineyards or whatever else you're doing on your land. Those are long-term investments that people 10, 20, 30 years down the road can realize. And hopefully we see some change in how agriculture is done in our community, where we can somehow take the land, not take the land like rob or steal or pillage other farmers, but get the land from the few into the hands of the many, and repopulate the food producing landscape with many, many different people who can then give the land the care that it requires in order for us to produce more food for our community. But that's a little bit of an aside, but those things are always on my mind as a farmer here. 35 acres for one family is way too much. I should be splitting up my land. If I was allowed from the powers that be to do this, I would probably do it. Be splitting up my 35 acres into 7 5-acre chunks and get 7 families operating on the farm. Now your eyes to acre ratio is what it should be. It's not what it is right now, and that's why I got to bring in a labor force to do the things, do these things. And I think, yeah, I would like to see a redistribution of land somehow, some way. I'm not sure how that would work, but those are really important things to think about down the road. But I've wandered from the things that are important to talk about as well, and that's how do you create this in your system. So constant fertility, and then obviously you know about the suckering on these plants and let them get up to the ceiling. And this is a good time for me to talk about how we can learn things from the industrial system. So we're very critical often as small-scale farmers of the big guys and the guys who are doing things industrial or the modern agriculture, but don't forget that they have built an efficient system, and there are many things that we can glean from them and apply to our scenario on small scale. For example, equipment, right? Maybe all we need is somebody to be able to build small scale equipment for small scale farms, but we can use the lessons they've learned and done the research for on big farms. Here's another example with these simple little tomato spools of wire here, of string that we drop as the tomatoes, the tomato reaches up there, and we'll just drop a loop and we'll drop another loop throughout this. That was gleaned from the commercial guys out there. So, and there's other examples that we can learn. You know, the irrigation we have on the farm was developed by big scale thinking, right? And now we can adapt that and modify it maybe to fit our system. So the overhead irrigation in here is another good example of that. So to be critical of it is, to be critical of it and not see any good in it is a very dangerous thing. So let's learn from the big industrial farms, modern agriculture, and apply the good that they're doing. They do some good, right? There's a lot of bad things happen too, but there's definitely value there. Yeah.
I think once you produce the tomatoes, then you're going to compost the plants?
Yeah, so what we would do is just cut them off at the bottom, leave the roots in, and then the next crop would come in here.
A lot of the strings are do you have a system or something to remove those strings when you...
Yeah, we just take these little clips off and then we wind them up again. We can get like it's the UV protected string. You get a lot of years out of one spool. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna head out. I'm gonna show you the transplants, how we do our transplants, and go from there. So this is our propagation house, or was our propagation house, and this is something that you're going to discover as well as you go on your agricultural journey, is that some things that everybody's been doing, you think you need to do, and that's the best way just because they've been doing it for years, so they must know. And so we found that with the propagation house, we've now moved all our transplants outdoors, and we do the majority of our propagation outside. And this was sparked by the heat dome that we had last year, that extraordinary heat. I had about 200 or 300 trays in my greenhouse, and they were saying it was going to get above 40, and I said, no, that won't happen. We've never had a temperature above 40 in Chilliwack. It's not going to happen. But as the days came closer, we realized, yeah, we were in for some extreme heat. So on a Saturday, we don't have a lot of people working on Saturday or Sunday. I moved all the transplants by myself into the warehouse. And I said, that was a lot of work. And then they had to come in the next Monday and I had to water them and all those things. I said, well, what if we try our transplants outdoors? Maybe we don't need a greenhouse in order to do that. So we've now moved our transplants outside, and I'll just show you what that looks like. And I don't think I'm going to be doing transplants indoors next year, other than maybe some really early starts like our early romaine lettuce, but a lot of that can be done in unheated greenhouse. So we could do that inside here. Our early onions, for example, we are probably going to still do some transplants, but those could be direct seeded into beds in this semi-protected greenhouse. It has no artificial heat source. It's entirely dependent on the sun for its energy, and we would just seed the onions right down a bed and then take them out and transplant them in the field and move away from this heavy carbon type way of heating and go to a less energy required for that system. So let's take a look over here. So we now do all our seeding into crates, and the reason we did crates and not the standard tray is twofold. Number one, the trays we need to buy in. The crates we already have. So less purchasing of plastics, plus the crates are a reused bulb crate from the industry. Again, they formalize the system, we apply it here. We got these handy dandy crates, we pick into the crates, we make tables out of the crates, we do our transplants in here. Now what I really am fascinated about is that, because, and underneath here, and if you can lift up a tray, if you take a look underneath, you're gonna find all kinds of beetles and slugs and millipedes and centipedes. And as we talked about before, with the soil food web, they're decomposing and providing food and nutrients for the plant. We always found that when the plants kind of reach this stage, they exhaust all the nutrients in the tray and they start to turn yellow. But now they're pushing down, pulling up nutrients from down below, and you can see the roots extending through, and there's a bit of a gap here. There's a bit of an air gap, and we find that the roots don't go all the way through and down until quite a bit later. But now what I found is that if I allow the roots to penetrate and get down into that existing layer down below after 3 weeks of being outside, they start to, what I want to do is I want to root prune them and force them to develop a good root system in here, so when I take them out and transplant them, they're well-developed root system inside the tray. So what I'll do is I'll just come along and I'll move them a bit like this to rip up that, that root off the existing surface. You can see the beetles moving around, and you know that cricket frass and beetle frass, which is the poop from insects, some of the most nutrient-dense food around, feeding these plants. And now outdoors the temperature is moderated. Indoors, if it's 30 outside, it's 40 inside, no matter what you do. We don't have any fancy cooling system, so we can really reduce the temperature and put them in a more natural spot. I would think that in the future I'll probably do this underneath one of the trees in the field to give them the shade they need. The brassicas this time of year don't need that. They would do better at the 24 to 25 degree weather, as opposed to the 30s that are coming up next week and the week following. So this system has now worked really well. It's the first year we're doing this. Otherwise this would have all been indoors, and we're able to produce a better transplant. Now I've freed up that whole area inside. Outside real estate is so cheap, relatively, compared to indoor. Indoor is really expensive. And so we freed up the space, we plant something else, and the transplants are happier. So those are some things that you might want to consider. And the other reason why I like this taller tray is I was thinking about the possibility of, like, if I just had a really short tray, it'd be easier for those insects maybe to come in and start eating. Not that the beetles and what would eat this, but maybe slugs or something like that. So maybe the taller tray helps for that. I don't know. Maybe rabbits second guess jumping in here and starting to nibble around. But there's so much food available. And you know, if that did become a problem, I'm sure that we could find a way to cover these with maybe glass and protect them a little bit from rodents. So that scares me a little bit, because a rabbit can eat a lot of food in one night. But so far it hasn't been a problem, just because there's so much other food around. In the spring, this may be a serious issue, because rabbits are hungry in the spring, and so are rats and mice, and nibbling on your early romaine lettuces might be a bit of a problem. So now indoors, next year, we will probably get some kind of a system that we can use in the warehouse, or maybe in one of the greenhouses where you have the grow lights and the heat pad underneath. And we'll just do that. We'll get a really small system. We'll do that maybe for first 50 or so transplant trays, and after that, everything's going to be outdoors. Yep.
How much of a 300-foot row is one of these bins?
There are 200 plants in one. So we used to use a 200 cell tray, and we use a vacuum seeder for this. So we drop them quite precisely in place. So 200, a bed of cabbage requires 300 plants. So 1.5 per bed.
Are you still using the vacuum seeder?
Yeah, we still use the vacuum seeder in here. Yeah. Yeah.
And getting the transplants out, is it?
Yeah, so I'll show you, I'll grab one on the other side and show you what that would look like. So these ones are a little more established here. I think that they planted with these ones last week. This is a storage cabbage, and just a matter of grabbing this, and as you would break bread, right? You're just breaking these individual plants off, and you can see they got quite a significant root system. And we found that, like, we were getting a little bit too greedy on space and saying, well, maybe we can do like 300 or 400 in one thing. But then they were getting too crowded, they were getting spindly, and they weren't getting a very big root system. And when we broke them apart, like, we were getting like 3 roots per plant, and that was a problem. So less is better for most types of transplants. You can see these, this is chard. They really produce quite a root system. You can see right here. So this is soil that Andrew made for us at TerraFlora Organics. But I actually think, not to put Andrew out of business, but you could probably, because you could probably get a really cheap soil mix with less nutrition in there if you laid them right on the surface, because it's amazing, as soon as those plants germinate, they send a root, and it's a small plant that has a long root, and those roots, if they go right away down into the mulch or whatever soil you have below, they can right away start feeding and get their nutrition from underneath. And so maybe you can get away with, say, a cheaper starter mix. So this, in fact, is what we just took off the compost pile, and I think they mixed it 50-50 with the potting soil. So we're getting, anything to cut corners and to do things a little cheaper, obviously, is money in the bank, right? If you don't have to spend it, then you can save it, or you can put it onto something else. So that's a little bit about our transplant adventure. And yeah, so that greenhouse now, next year I can do like sweet potatoes in there or something like that, and it's going to be more profit and less cost. I was actually thinking of maybe building a simple hoop off this concrete wall, coming around with a hoop like this, and maybe we could do all our transplants in here and then be able to take the plastic off when the temperatures warm up. So we're trying to get innovative and creative about how we can do that and use these greenhouses, which are very expensive, for other purposes. This is the herb garden here. This is where we do all our herbs, very, very close to the market, because we frequently pick those. We want to freshen them out every couple of days in the store, and they're nicely accessible. So think about, your important zones. Your greenhouse area is like zone 1. That's the most important area of your farm. And the next area that closest to your farm is the things that you're going to be interacting with on a regular basis. So herbs is something that we pick regularly. Notice that with the herbs, by the way, herb profitability is probably the highest per square foot on the farm. We sell to some high-end restaurants, and herbs is a big thing for them, $17 a pound. And really, like off this little space here, I probably can get a pound. And if I cut it, it's happier and it regrows faster. And so there's a lot of money to be made in a bed of herbs. You see the far end, we actually mowed down with a flail mower. So we took the flail mower about 3-4 weeks ago and we mowed that area down, because the restaurants aren't looking for the flower anymore. Although some do love the flower, and you can still eat it, right? So the flower is here now to attract the beneficials. We're now harvesting from the front. When that's in full production, we'll mow this piece over here, and so we have a constant supply of herbs right through the season. And then by like September, we'll make sure that the majority gets mowed, and so we can go into the winter season with a full stand of herbs, and we just harvest from that all winter. And you can see the bee life and the hoverflies on this type of plant. So when we talk about biodiversity, you have to think about reaching or meeting the requirements of all types of insects that you want to have on your farm. And sometimes a really small flower is more beneficial for parasitic or wasp, parasitic wasp and hoverflies, and smaller flying insects prefer smaller flower, and other types of flowers will attract different types of insects. So you think beyond bees, right? You want to be thinking about, in fact, most of the bees we have here are non-native, unless they're bumblebees. Most of the bees are imported, right? So you want to hit the native species, because they're the ones that are the most resilient. They're going to stick around as long as we're here and things don't get too wacky with our climate. And those are the ones you want to really feed. Okay, keep moving down. This is how we've been doing some of our more recent composting in these long windrows here. And these are just a mixture of mushroom compost, wood chips. That's basically what it is, leaves. And we mix it on the far end on the pad, and then we dump it here with our machines. And these are 1.5 year to 2 year old piles, and they're very fungally dominant. And what I want to see in a pile is your first year, Andrew will talk about this more, the first while you're going to see a lot of the red wrigglers, and they're doing a lot of the early decomposition. The bacteria really are doing the work, and then the wrigglers move along and eat the bacteria and the fungi. But later on, you're going to get the more advanced species in your compost. So in this stuff here, what I'm looking for is the beetles, the millipedes, the centipedes, and the regular earthworm, the bigger, fatter earthworm. And that's what we're starting to find in there. Now I know it's ready to be used on the farm. And so that's my top end compost. And so the kind of the thinking is going forward is any crops that require like special care are going to get the more expensive compost, and the other ones that we're looking to cover the ground with some material are going to get the cheaper, less composted material. Okay, we're on the other end of the carrot beds that we were on before, and I know I had a question earlier on about how we deal with weeds, so I want to show you the wheel hoe because it's a really nifty tool, and I have to ask Dallas if he can grab that for me. Hey Dallas, can you grab the wheel hose for me? They're on the far side there. Okay.
You guys turn your compost?
We do initially, yeah. And Andrew will talk about that. So what we're doing with our compost is we will continue to mix it until we get a stable temperature of about 50 Celsius. When it reaches that temperature and it's been mixed enough, it's going to be on its own. The temperature will dip a little bit and head into the 40s, and that's kind of where we want it to be, and it will continue to cool and attract new insects and decomposers throughout that period. Yeah. Okay, so he's going to grab me a couple of wheel hose. While he's doing that, I know there's a question here.
How do you contain this? The horseradish?
Oh, horseradish, you don't really.
Yeah, I know.
Once you got it, yeah. So horseradish on the side here. The way that you contain it is not to let it extend beyond its original plant. So you can see all these baby plants that develop. So those ones should just be dug out and stay with the main plant. This is where people who till are going to be screwed. As soon as you start tilling this stuff, we're trying to get rid of it one year. We got the power harrow out, and you basically chop it up into 1 million 1-inch pieces. Now you got 1 million horseradish plants scattered abroad. So that's not the way to do it. Dig them out, and that's your only solution. But for restaurants, this has become really profitable for us. So we get a restaurant that wants 5 pounds, and we'll just get the machine with the forks. We'll just dig it out and then clean it off and send them the whole plant with the leaves and all. So yeah, it's a good crop to grow. It's deep rooting. And I also thought about if you have stubborn resistive weeds along your border, start growing horseradish and it will push out those weeds. It will occupy the entire space. So horseradish will compete with horsetail, and I'd rather have horseradish than horsetail, although horsetail is also, you can make teas and other medicinal things with that, so it has benefits there. Okay, looks like the wheel hose are here. You can tell this one here is, comes at an angle, right? So that allows you to wheel hoe in the bed without walking in the bed. And I'll just show you on the carrots over here. These carrots are planted 10 inches apart, and the wheel hoe is 8 inches. It means I got 1 inch to spare on both sides. And we will do this for the first probably 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the carrot's life. We'll go through every week, or definitely before you even see weeds. That's the time to use the wheel hoe. So I don't even see weeds here. You'd think, well, what a waste of time. Well, I'm getting anything that's considering to germinate or maybe has started to germinate, expose it to the surface, the heat and the sun and the wind. And so I could just move it down my beds like this. It's kind of coarse here, but through that coarser material, I'll just kind of take it. And you'll notice I'm quite rough. So what I want to do is try to get that material up against the carrot plant without covering it entirely. And you'll discover that in doing that, you can cover the entire area. So here, now we talk about no soil disturbance. So here's another example. Yeah, there is some soil disturbance here. It's very minimal. And you can see why we like to plant carrots in less coarse material, right? So this is a very effective way of weeding. So 1 or 2 days ahead of the weeding crew, one of the older guys or girls will take this and go through, deal with all this surface area, and then somebody will come along with this 12-inch wheel hoe. And here we're going in the pathways, right up against the carrots. You can see the carrots are planted quite densely, and so I don't mind if I take a few out. Might be good. So this, and then we let the weeds bake in the sun. 1 or 2 days later, the kids come along, and their weeding job is simply, like some of these weeds, you know, they're just pulling these bigger guys out, and there's very little work involved in the weeding process. And so we'll use this also in the transplanted areas. So this here, somebody is going to come down, right down these beds, get right in there. Takes a little bit of skill. And then we can do from here all the way up to here. So like 4 or 5 passes with the broad wheel hoe. It's a lot of work. 4 or 5 passes. We're tired. You hear I'm gasping for breath right now. Not gasping, but it's a lot of work. So then we're kind of thinking like maybe we'll get to a point where we can get a cultivator underneath the tractor, behind the tractor, that we can pull along and deal with some of that. And so now we go 1 pass down the bed as opposed to probably, well, 3 or 4 on this side, 4 on that side. That's a lot of land you got to cover with a wheel hoe. So maybe there's a system we can move to later on behind the tractor. But the problem with those cultivators is they're not designed for coarse material that we often deal with, and they bunch up. So if they hit a stick or a twig, they just drag it along and rip out your other plants. So there's no way to deal with that. But here's the thing. I'm not farming very smart here, because I have, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, a space from here to here that is not going to be occupied. These plants will grow fast. They're for about a week. They develop some roots, and they'll quickly get up, but it's still going to take a long time for them to start occupying the space. So let's get smart. Maybe I can get 4 rows of radishes in here, or 10 rows of radishes, really, right? And that's why, like, the skill that we're at, sometimes people say, well, no wonder you can do so much, because you got tractors and you got all that stuff. But I also have a hard time filling up all the space. So as a smaller farmer, because you come in there with your 2 feet in your hands, you're less invasive, or you're less compaction on the land. But I come in with a heavy tractor, and it's really inconvenient to plant these areas in between, and so I leave them empty. But you can actually do all that stuff, right? So you can be much more efficient in your use of the land. So there's something to bear in mind as well. You have more opportunities to a certain extent than we do. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at, okay, I should talk about profitability before we go on, because it's usually a favorite conversation when I do tours, because people say, how much money can you make in farming? And the answer is lots. Lots and lots and lots. But the other answer is, if you're doing it for the money, then maybe you're doing it for the wrong reason. First, the love of farming, the love of producing food, feeding a community, is all important. The money part is there simply because of the world we live in today. it's unfortunate that we have to be focused on it. Wouldn't it be nice to not even have the conversation come up? But it is what it is, and if you're not financially sustainable and you're not making money on your farm, then you won't be able to farm very long. And the farm is going to be in someone else's hands in a few years. So profit is important. This bed here will have, I believe, 300 cabbages. I think they're planted a little too densely. Somebody planted on the spacing here, giving us about 450 per bed. I think we're going to come through and take out a few here and there, because these are winter cabbages, and especially these ones over here, a variety called Zalima or Storage number 4. They're growing like, I don't know, the cabbage itself is about that big, like the plant, and then the head is 12, 15 pounds. So they grow massive. We're going to need more space in there, but I'm going to say we get 300 per bed. If you get $1 per pound, and each cabbage is 10 pounds, that's $3,000 per bed. Maybe you can get $1.50. These are winter cabbages, they're big. I have a hard time selling them for more than $1, because if you sell them for $2, then people say, oh, local harvest, they're selling cabbages for $25 each, without any further explanation that they're massive and grown organically without sprays, etc. That's always a thing we gotta deal with. But $3,000 per bed, 30 beds per acre. That's how many beds you can get per acre. Translates to about $90,000. Starting with a planting right about now in mid-July. But before that, you could have planted carrots, 300-foot bed of carrots, yielding around 1,000 pounds per bed, giving you, at our price in the store, $2 per pound, $2.50 per pound sometimes, giving you about $2,000 per bed at, is my math okay? $2,000 per bed, 1,000 pounds, $2 per pound, $2,000 per bed, 30 acres, or 30 beds per acre, giving you, what's that, 60 grand. So 90,000 and 60,000 is 150,000 on 1 acre in 1 year. There's a lot of ifs here. Does your brassicas, do they turn out? Maybe they're infested with pests. How much labor did you put in there? Is there a market for it? There's so many other variables at play, but the bottom line is that the potential for you as a grower is $150,000 per acre, and we find that that's kind of where we've discovered things to land in terms of any crop you're growing. We have realized around $50,000 per acre. Okay, that's approximately what we're generating in revenue per acre. But there's cost, and that's the labor cost, all the rest, cost of seed, cost of irrigation, cost of, there's, you know, the investment on the land, etc., etc. But my point is, 150,000 is achievable, and market gardeners are doing that. Some are doing $200,000 per acre, and I haven't even talked about using the space in between, getting that crop of radishes or lettuce out. Look at the space in between the carrots. I mean, the carrots are up, they've been in the ground for 4 or 5 weeks already. Could have easily planted something in between there and down all those rows, right? So the upper limit of your productivity is very, very high. Plus, remember that you have all this depth you can work with. If you can get your carrots longer, so now, you know, instead of an 8-inch carrot, you get a 10-inch and a 12-inch or an 18-inch carrot, which is doable in no-till. We haven't got there yet, but I know it's doable. I've seen guys do it. Then you're getting double the production on your poundage. Now, at the same time, the world we live in today, we're getting most of our food from California, Mexico. So your job as a farmer then is the education piece with the consumer. There's some challenges with that, but there's a lot of opportunities. A lot of people need just to understand how you farm, why you farm the way you do, and you have a lifelong customer. And that's really what it's about. So look at the group we have here, 40 people. If you guys in your farming world can change the thinking of maybe 100 people, you know, you can see how fast we can make this grow. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of future in this. So at 150,000 per acre, say your cost is 50,000, now it's going to take 2 years to pay off your land. Right? Local agriculture, so dairy farmers in this area, might be able to do 3,000 to 5,000 per acre. And you can do 150 in gross revenue. Why are more people not farming like this? Well, again, I'm getting into the philosophical side of things, is because farms are too big. We need to split them up. We need to make them affordable for the masses, and we need to get people back onto the land. But I believe that'll happen one of two ways. The first way is through a catastrophic economic event, or something violent happening in the community that is going to prohibit us from getting cheap food from the hard workers, the Mexicans, the Hondurans, the Ecuadorians, whoever else is growing our food today. That's the first way. The second way is through the patient re-education of and changing the way that the grassroots thinks about where their food comes from, and that itself will cause a food revolution. That's a non-violent way. I hope it goes that way. I'm not too sure if it's going to. It may be the reverse. But either way, I think we're going to get there at one point in time. The last thing I'm going to show you is potatoes, and then we're going to go check out Andrew, okay? I hear a lot of growers, market gardeners, saying that potatoes are too much work. They're too labor intensive. There's no money to be made. It's hard on the back. But we have found that potatoes, next to probably garlic, so our top money makers on the farm, and when I count expenses in there, so what can we make the most money on? Probably carrots at the top, garlic is near the top, potatoes definitely near the top, salad mix near the top, spinach, all the greens kind of up there. Those are kind of the big five. We probably make 75% of our income on the top five. And then the other ones that, we got the celery, which is pretty good, and onions are also actually near the top. You kind of get the idea. The staple foods that people expect, beets are at the top, they actually make the money. And so I would say if you're just starting out, grow just the staple foods. Don't get too fancy. Don't go too wild. You want to try that variety and that, you want to try everything, right? Yeah. Oh man, it'd be cool to do this. Stick with the top 5 or 6 things that I mentioned, grow them really well, and then slowly expand. Okay, let's try some leeks. Not that popular, but let's try a bunch of different things. When we get more established, then you can start to try new things. So this is a variety called Jazzy, and it's kind of a fingerling potato, and I'll just show you what these guys can do for you. So they're not near full size yet. Okay, this is one potato seed, which I don't even see the mother on the plant anymore. But this is what these guys can give you. And they're, with no till, they're so easy to harvest, right? You can just, and they're clean. Look how clean they're coming out the ground. I like to do potatoes, I won't steal from this plant beside. I like to do potatoes in my first year of no-till, just because they're very forgiving, they're very easy to weed, and you can mulch with very coarse material. So if you have your raw material is, say, wood chips, you can actually just mulch with wood chips. And I actually would have put more mulch on these ones, but I couldn't get in the field early enough because it was so wet. But this is off one plant, and this is more like a fingerling variety, and that's one thing. If you are going to do potatoes, maybe do some specialty potatoes, because the main market is the Yukon Golds and the Kennebecs and Russets. But what if you were to try something like Jazzy, or some of the other, you can even go to some classic heirlooms, although we're finding with some of the heirloom varieties, they tend to be a little more scabby, a little more disease, and so it's all cute and stuff to go that route, right? Heirloom tomatoes is another good example of that, but your production is down, you get a little more disease, It's harder to sell an heirloom tomato because your price has to be higher, and you know what the customers do when they come in the store? They want to see if they're ripe, right? Well, of course they're ripe. Like, you think we're going to put an unripe tomato there? The first thing they do is pinch it, right? Well, 1 or 2 customers does that, you know, it's hopeless. And sometimes the heirlooms, they split, or they don't look as pretty on the top, and so they're a tough sell. I love to grow only heirlooms, but is a customer ready for that? So we've gone now, we only mostly sell heirloom tomatoes to the good customers who know us and come in and say, could I have some heirlooms? And we run out and grab them, or restaurants. And then there's no pinching, and yeah.
Are you top dressing compost on these with the
Yeah, I couldn't because it was so wet, but that's what we normally do. So we carve a furrow, small furrow. We drop our potatoes every foot or every 2 feet approximately down the row. And then we just cover, usually we just cover with our feet, just move along, cover with some more there. We cover with our feet, and then thereafter we get our hiller. We have a small little hiller, pull it behind the tractor, and it forms a bit of a hill. And then we hill again the next week to form a bigger hill as the potato's growing. And then we, after all the hilling, maybe 3-4 passes with the hilling, which is also a great effective weed control. It is a lot of disturbance. There's a lot of soil disturbance with potatoes. I don't really know a way around that. And then when we top dress with coarse material like wood chips, or you know, something that's not fully composted, maybe some mushroom compost or something like that. And we cover up, and then we deal with a weed-free scenario. And then when harvest time comes along, it's such a pleasant job. It's no work. You don't have to worry about digging in this tough, hard clay. They're right at the surface, and it's just really a pleasurable thing to do. And then we can take these, move them in the store, and sell them fast, right? So less labor and funner work. Like, this really, this is so amazing that as farmers here, I believe that one farmer, we are probably feeding around 100 to 200 people per farmer if they were only eating vegetables off our farm for the entire year. So one farmer feeding around 100. Maybe I'm way out on the number. Maybe it's more like 50 or 20. But isn't that amazing that one person can feed even 20 people? And it's with ease on a small little piece of land, and yet we're not doing that. You know, it's so sad that we are at this stage with so much advancement in technology and all the rest. We've forgotten agriculture for some reason. Maybe because pharmaceuticals made more money, or I'm sure it comes down to money somewhere. But for whatever reason, we're producing so little food in general. And I think that I could probably work, maybe to feed myself and my family, I could work 1 hour per day on all I would need is 1 acre of land. How big is an acre of land? See this section? 6 of these is an acre of land. If I had 1 acre of land and I had the 7 members of my family in a small little house on that 1 acre of land and produce food, I could produce easily enough food for those 7 people all year round, and I probably could work 1 hour per day. Not even. I get my kids to do all the work anyway. So I basically wouldn't have to work. Produce enough food, live in a comfortable home, doesn't have to be fancy, and then all the rest is leisure time, right? And the way society is working today, we're driving to and fro, and we're wild, and we're busy, and we're more stressed than ever, but it's so simple. Food production is simple, and I hope that we move in that direction in the very near future, because I just don't like the way things are currently, and I think we can change for the better.
What's the variety of potato that's in the store right now? There's 3 colors.
It would be
Ones that
Jazzy. I believe it's Amorosa, which is the next one over, and the purples. This is a purple heirloom variety. The name I forgot. And then I'll show you the next one over.
Yeah, is that the...
Yeah, it's some kind of a Russian blue potato. Look at it. There is some scab on there.
Yes.
Okay, you can see a little bit of scab, not quite as productive, but I'm taking the scrawny plant at the end, and then the next one over is a Amorosa. So Russian blue, Amorosa, and then we grow the Warbas, Alaska Bloom. There's another type, Warba type potato, and then we do the Pontiac and the red Chieftain and Yukon Gold. We also grow those staple potatoes because we have some customers who, that's what they know and love, because that's what Mom used to grow and Grandma used to grow it, and try to get them started in something new.
And that concludes our no-till field day. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to our host farmer and guest speakers for being a part of this. Thanks to everyone who came out live. We hope it was an educational resource for you, and please reach out to Farm Folk City Folk if you have any questions.